Good morning, church.
Morning.
Tom, did you hand me this because...
I forgot to announce.
Okay. That's what I suspected, but anytime a piece of cardboard gets thrown at me, I'm unsure. So, yeah, the Awakening, which is a men's conference, coming up the 12th of October in Sturgis. And I've been to one of these. I think this is the third year that they've done this. And it's a pretty good deal. This year they've got a keynote speaker by the name of Brad Stein. He's a comic, but he comes at his comedy from a Christian point of view. Doesn't say this on this card, but one of his books, Brad Stein's got a couple of books out, and one of his books is called How to Be a Christian and Not Be an Idiot. So I think that ought to be a class we teach to to all Christians when they make the decision to be a disciple of Jesus. Alrighty then. Well, we're in the book of Mark. We're in chapter 7. In the 60s, the play Godspell came out, and the opening scene, a young man in blue jeans steps onto the stage and with volume says, "I gotta get washed." And I think that it speaks to a universal feeling that all of us have, that we're unclean and we're not altogether sure what to do about it. When I was a kid growing up in West Texas, there was a lot of uncharted territory to explore, not too far from my house. And that was back in the day when, as long as you didn't miss 3 meals, your parents didn't worry about you. You know, during the summertime anyway. And we'd get up early in the morning and we'd head out to an area that we called Mystery Mountain. So this is West Texas, you understand. And I was, after I'd been living in the hills just a short time, I went back to see my parents, and I hiked out to Mystery Mountain, and it's only about that tall. But but it was one of the highest points in the city of Big Spring, or in the vicinity thereof. We would there was a little creek that ran by Mystery Mountain, and we'd catch crawdads and hike through the mesquite trees, and there were mosquitoes and chiggers gargantuan, and it was hot, and I remember that the one thing at the end of a day of exploring, well, actually two, there were 2 things at the end of a day like that really were on everybody's mind. One of them was getting home and getting a cool drink of water. The other one was taking a shower. And just the feeling of getting all of that junk off of you was amazing. I know it sounds weird for the preacher to be talking about that, but I think that we live in a culture that has been enlightened. We're being told on a regular basis that the reason that people believe in God is because thousands of years ago we didn't understand the universe like we do now. And so when crops failed or when storms came through and killed people, we invented deities to kind of explain all that away and fill the gaps. And now that we understand that storms are caused by predictable weather patterns, and the weather guy can tell you, which is a joke because he can't, but the weather guy is supposed to be able to tell you that tomorrow it's going to be 85 and sunshiny, and so there's no God, or if there is a God, he's not this this foreboding, angry individual before whom we stand guilty. But in the old days, they were constantly dealing with shame and guilt, and we've moved past all of that, right? Yeah, except we haven't. We are probably the most guilt and shame-ridden culture that has ever walked the planet. We just don't really know altogether what to do about it. And so we spend a lot of time polishing up the outside. Much of what happens in religious circles, don't tell me it isn't, because I know it is. Much of what happens in religious circles is about polishing up the outside. It's about making sure that we do certain things and making sure that we don't do certain things. But it still really doesn't make us feel much better. So Jesus, in Mark chapter 7, and it's kind of a long reading, so just jump in here with me and we'll read together, and then we're going to jump over to chapter 9 to conclude the sermon. But the Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw that some of his disciples eating food with hands that were unclean, that is, unwashed. You're not going to find any place in the New Testament where Jesus washed his hands. And it strikes me as odd that, he could have once in a while, just placated these folks and washed his hands, but he and his disciples did not. In verse 3 says, Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing. Now you understand this is not what your mom always told you, that you have to wash your hands before you eat. Because, why is that? You guys aren't working with me, but yeah, you got germs on your hands. And my grandpa, God rest his soul, preached for 50 years before he died at the age of 84. Most of that time he preached and provided his own salary as a cotton farmer. And I remember regularly we would be at the in the little community where my granddad preached, and he would come in from church after Sunday, and he would sit down and we'd all be relaxed, and my grandmother would be cooking fried chicken, and it was the kind of fried chicken that you didn't buy at Safeway, that you went out in the backyard and grabbed that chicken by the neck, and well, anyway, I won't go into the details, but you get the point. It was real fried chicken, and my grandmother would say, "Hey, it's time to eat," and my granddad would say, "I got to go wash the brethren off my hands," and so he would. I don't even know what that means necessarily, but I kind of got the idea. He'd been shaking hands all morning and felt the need to wash his hands. That's not what's going on here in Mark chapter 7. The Pharisees and the Jews all do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing. So this has to do with making sure that you're clean ceremonially so that you can fellowship with other people in Israel. And I won't take the time to do this, but you do it yourself if you're interested. Read all of the things that you could do that would make you unclean. If you touched dead anything, if you had a rash on your skin, if there was a whole bunch of things that made you unclean. And so this was a ceremonial thing. not a germs thing. And he goes on to say, Mark does, that they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and kettles, again, for the benefit of religious cleansing. So verse 5, the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the traditions of the elders, instead of eating their food with unclean hands?" And he replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you," what's that word? Hypocrites. Two Greek words, hypocrasis, where we get our word hypocrite. Crossus was I've shared this with you guys, but the crossus was the mask that the actor would wear on stage. Hypo means to be under. So hypocrasis means a person wearing a mask. What an incredibly important statement that Jesus is making. This is not intended, typically when I say, if I were to walk up to Tom and say, I think you're a hypocrite, that might not go real well, because there is this there's this implication that you're intentionally being deceptive. But that doesn't necessarily, I don't think necessarily that's what Jesus is saying here. They were part of a religious system that bred hypocrisy. It was all about the buffing up of the outside of the individual, but had absolutely nothing to do with the transformation of the inside of the individual. So I don't think Jesus is trying here to be demeaning. I think he's trying to get across the idea that they were part of a system that creates hypocrisy. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men." You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. And it's so cool that we've gotten past that problem in the 21st century. I was kind of expecting just a little giggle or something there. So he talks about the traditions and setting aside the commands of God for the traditions of men, which I'm going to skip for the moment. And I want to jump down to verse 14. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him, and he said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a man can make him unclean by going into him. Rather, it is what comes out of the man that makes him unclean." And I love this. The disciples are always nodding their head, and then when the crowd leaves, they're always saying, "We don't have a clue what you just said." So in verse 17, after he had left the crowd and entered the house, the disciples asked him about the parable. And he says, "Are you so dull?" he asked. "Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from the outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach and then out of his body." In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, "What comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within," see the problem? "Out of men's hearts come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these evils come from inside." That's what makes the man unclean. So Jesus is laying his finger right where we hurt. This idea, and I hear it all the time from people who are basically attacking the Christian worldview and saying, if there really was a God, if God really was all loving and all powerful, then there wouldn't be all of this hurt and heartache and disease and difficulties on this planet. Guys, the problem isn't God. The problem is what? Me. The problem is all of the garbage on the inside of this guy. And if I might be so bold, you're in the same boat. So we have a fundamental problem The problem is that we really do clean up pretty well. We come to church and we all, on varying degrees, we look decent. Some of us a little iffy, but we look okay. We're shaved and the fingernails are clean and teeth are brushed for the most part. And one of my pet peeves, and you guys have heard me talk about this as well, but this "Hi, how are you doing? Fine, how are you?" is so useless and such a lie. But that's expected. We don't. The idea that I would walk up to Tom and say, "Hi, how are you doing?" and he'd say, "Have a seat, let me tell you." That's not, number one, that's not what I'm expecting. Number two, the human part of John would say, "Oh, seriously?" So, we live in this religious culture that, to a very real extent, has the same problem that the folks in the first century had. It's about buffing up the outside, but there isn't any real significant work being done to change what's going on the inside. And this is not the only time that Jesus touches on this. Almost every time Jesus speaks, he addresses this issue in one way or another. Matthew 5, the outline of his sermon, I think primarily the sermon that he preached everywhere. Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are we call those the what? The Beatitudes. Those are Beatitudes because they are all about what we are to be and not about what we are to do. So Jesus begins, at the very beginning of his ministry, saying, you got it all wrong. This isn't about what you do. This is about what you have to become. Well, fiddly dee. My son Caleb, on occasion, his job is to empty the dishwasher, and 98.7% of the time he does an absolutely phenomenal job, but sometimes he's in a hurry. And he just grabs stuff out of the dishwasher and sticks it in the cupboard. And then I'll go grab a cup and I'll start to put some water in it, and I'll look down in there and there's something nasty. And see, the problem with a dishwasher is, if it made it through, if it was stuck on the inside of the glass and it made it through the dishwasher, there's two things. It was resilient. Okay, that's problem number one. Problem number two, now it's baked on. Okay, so whatever that was, the outside looks pretty good, but the inside, what in the world is that? And it takes a chisel to get it out of there. Jesus is trying to be somewhat humorous when he says you scrub the outside of the cup, but you don't pay any attention to the inside. With the idea of trying to get across to us that this isn't about buffing ourselves up and making us look good on the outside. It's not about going through a series of do's and don'ts. It's about fundamentally changing the way you think. And my question to you would be, how long has it been? Honestly, you don't have to tell me. But honestly, how long has it been since a piece of Scripture impacted you in such a way that it fundamentally changed the way you think or the way you do business? And that's an important question, because if all we do is pretty much what we did last week and the week before and the week before that, if the only thing that's changing is the fact that we're just getting a little older each week and nothing's changing in here in the way we think, then we've missed this. Guys, we've missed it. This is all for nothing. You understand? I mean, the singing the songs and praying the prayers. Is there anything wrong with singing songs and praying prayers? No. That's a beautiful thing. And I love being with my church family and singing songs and praying prayers and studying the Bible together. And all of those things are good. But if we come in and all that's doing is just buffing up the outside, and then we walk away with the inside unchanged, yeah, we've missed it. So, walked in the door the other day and I smelled something really weird, and I thought, what in the world? And I asked Sabrina what that was. And she said, oh, the couch is on fire. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, but we moved it over to the corner, so it should be just fine. That didn't really. Caleb's looking at Mom like, really? I actually found, the way up is such an amazing thing that, so I was looking I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I probably can't find a picture of a couch on fire, but I just Googled couch on fire, and what do you know? Not only did I find a ton of pictures of couches on fire, but I actually found a picture of a road sign that literally says, caution, couch burning ahead. That had to be an interesting day for the Department of Transportation, I'll have to tell you. Folks, in Mark 9, and for the sake of time, no, let's go over there. Let's look at Mark 9 real quickly. So this is still kind of in the same context of the verses that we're looking at. Verse 42 is that famous piece of scripture where he talks about causing a little one to stumble. But 43, he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go into hell, where the fire never goes out. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to go into life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. What in the world is Jesus saying here? Nobody takes this literal. Now, I'm sure there's probably been one or two, because How to Be a Christian Without Being an Idiot is a good book title. But I've never known anybody who cut their hand off because it was causing them to sin, or gouged their eye out because it was causing them to sin. So, I mean, generally speaking, we don't come to this passage of Scripture and say, well, that's literal. So the question is, what in the world is Jesus saying here? What is the question? I mean, what's his point? And the point is, if your couch is on fire, you don't just move it to the corner of the room, right? What do you do with a couch that's on fire? You get it out of the house before actually, maybe douse it with water first, but you don't try to contain it. You don't say, well, the next couple of days that'll probably go out, so let's just kind of, try to contain the thing. You treat a fire on the inside of the house with absolute severity. I mean, you just say, we're going to deal with that. Sin is the same way. The idea that you can just contain this, guys, if you hear nothing else I say, you've got to hear this. You are not going to train your sin. You're not going to keep it in a pen and bring it out when you want to play with it and then put it back. It is ruthless, and it eventually will kill you. Back several years ago, I believe it was, I'm not very good at chronology, but back several years ago there was a series on TV about when animals attack. Did you guys remember seeing that? And there was one of the episodes on that series where this swimsuit model was laying on a lion. And surprise, the lion mauled her and killed her. And you have to, I mean, I know that's serious, and I feel bad for the model. But this is an apex predator. Do you know what apex predator means? It means that he's the top of the food chain. So there's nothing that says, what do you want to eat today? How about lion? Nobody says that. You know, there's not any other characters in the jungle that has lion for supper. Lions, on the other hand, have all sorts of things, you know, underneath them for supper. So and here's an apex predator, and there's this swimsuit model laying on the predator. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you could lay a burrito on my head for a day or two and I would ignore it. But I mean, at some point, I'm going to eat that burrito. I just, you know, I'm just telling you. So, you know, the idea that we can just play with sin and lay on it and get our picture taken with it and etc., train it to do what we want it to do, eventually it's going to get you. It's not. It really isn't a matter of if. It's just a matter of when. And so Jesus says there's no sacrifice too large when it comes to getting rid of sin in your life. And I'm not talking about I will not cuss, I will not cuss. I'm talking about changing the way we think. It's still in the same context. We miss this if we think that church is about, religion is about, that didn't even work. If we think that the relationship with God is about the way we act on the outside, it's about what's being transformed on the inside. So if that's not happening, and only you really know, because it's pretty easy to fool the people around us. It really is. If transformation's not happening on the inside, then you're not spending enough time drawing near to the one who has the power to change you. Reading the Word is part of that, but just spending time fellowshipping with the Father is also part of that as well. So, if you have sin in your life that you need to deal with, sometimes it takes a brother and sister, a brother or a sister, or your church family to help. If there's anything we can do to help you in your relationship with Him, please let us know while we stand and watch.